felt like the tennis players were they're going to have better court movement. They had passing shots, they had different angles, and the paddles were quite slow. And so when I looked at it, a year ago, I was like, and this was quite controversial at the time, I think the game's going to speed up. Why are people not playing with tennis rackets? Rackets are slightly different in that basically they start with this internal frame, just like a tennis racket. So underneath this, if you take the face material off and our core out, it's just going to look like a tennis racket with no strings. So the frame goes all the way. It's a unibody frame that comes all the way down. And that's the first thermoforming process. It's a blow molded fluid carbon process. And it basically creates that frame all in one go.
What's up, guys? Ben here with another episode of 00 Start Podcast. Now, today we have a special one. It's definitely going to be one of the most unique podcasts we've done. We're here with founder of Om Pickleball and Jonny. We're going to have a day talking about something that you have brought to the industry that the industry has never seen before. So I'm pretty excited to get your thoughts, how this thing all started. And I'm going to let you talk about the first ever pickleball racket. And I think this is going to shake up the industry because I know pickleball is 60 years old, but it's really 10 years old, right? I mean, it's really 10 to 15 years old. The masses kind of started playing, but we've trained everybody over the last 60 years to say paddle. It's not a racket. It's a pickleball paddle. Don't say pickleball racket. It is a paddle until today. You guys on Pickleball releasing the first ever pickleball racket. So before we get to that actual racket itself, tell us about your start into pickleball. How did you get into the game? And then we'll get into how you're going to kind of shake this industry up with the first of its kind.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ben. Well, we'll try and crowbar a day into 15, 20 minutes or whatever we have. But yeah, getting into it was a bit random, actually. My wife kicked me out of my other business, not the house, just the business. We have another business here, and basically she'd had enough of being in it. I'm a born entrepreneur, so I get distracted by shiny objects, and I was becoming a bit of a liability to everybody at this company. So she kicked me out, and just so happened a friend of mine had sent me a text and asked if I wanted to play pickleball. So I went down and thought, yeah, I can burn an hour in the afternoon. And anyways, 6-7 hours later, I returned to a slightly anxious wife, telling her that I've now decided I'm going to start a pickleball brand, and we've got a whole new concept, and I've been talking to some guys on how we can build out the first pickleball rackets. And really, that was just because when I went down, like everyone else, I love the game of pickleball. I got addicted pretty much straight away. I really enjoyed watching people play and the enjoyment and just there was so many people. They were so passionate, and they had such a range of people. I loved watching 72-year-olds wail on 20-year-olds, and then they had like smack talk and lines afterwards. I got beat by a guy called Greg, who was 62 at the time, and he not only destroyed me, but he also had lines to follow up those passing shots, and that upset me, to be honest. So half the reason I started the company was just to build a better device so that I can beat this guy Greg, which at the moment I'm actually not selling to him because I refuse to. So yeah, so it was a pretty random start. But when I was talking to these guys, and they were all playing with variations of paddles, and I started asking questions like, how are they made? What are they made of? And no one could really give me that much of an answer. So I did what I usually do, which is beg, borrow, and steal, or try and buy some of the paddles that were out there. And I took them home and started cutting them up in a warehouse that I have. And because I'm a product design engineer, so this is what I do. And I kind of broke them all apart, and I was like, I don't understand why people are playing with paddles. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I think the game is speeding up. I wasn't a great tennis player, but I knew great tennis players. And I'm like, these guys will dominate this game. Like, it's basically small tennis. I know that's going to upset people a little bit, but what I meant is, it's like, I felt like the tennis players were they're going to have better court movement. They had passing shots, they had different angles, and the paddles were quite slow. And so when I looked at it, a year ago, I was like, and this was quite controversial at the time, I think the game's going to speed up. Why are people not playing with tennis rackets, like mini tennis rackets? This is before I knew all the rules and everything else. But The overriding goal was, I think tennis rackets or rackets are going to work better than paddles. That's what I think. I think a frame, and just from an engineering point of view, you're going to get more control, more feel, more power. You're going to be able to have a faster hand speed, move around quicker. You're going to be able to snap the wrist more. You're going to get those, top spin crossing shots. And all this was kind of coming off in the first 6 hours. And so that was what was created to do, is to create a legal racket frame design for pickleball. And so when I was running through all the concepts and talking to the guys that used to play tennis, they were telling me, I've got this pickleball coach now, and they're telling me I got to slow down my game and bring it up. And what I was saying to them is, I don't think you do. I could be wrong, but why would you spend 15 years learning everything that you've done to slow down your game? Why not just get a racket and speed up your game? Because I think you're going to have an advantage. And you're kind of starting to see that now. I think with the wins that have come up at the end of last year in November and moving forward, like the game speeding up, the tennis players are starting to take over. The game is definitely becoming, in my opinion, more watchable. And so I think the next step is to transition the entire industry from paddle type construction to racket construction, which is basically a racket frame, an internal racket frame. And then because I think the playability, you're able to do a lot more with a racket type construction than you are with a paddle. It won't be for everybody, but
yeah. So I guess if I can condense that into a couple sentences, that your belief is that a racket and the frame inside of a racket is you're able to, it's more performance based. It's going to perform better in every level.
Yeah, I think so, and that's kind of what we've been seeing with our guys and the guys that are using the Aero² at the moment. The racket frame, the internal racket frame, just gives you a lot more playability. You get better dwell time on the surface. You get a legal trampoline effect. Obviously, the Aero² is now USAPA approved, which was a problem at the beginning because a lot of people were using them, podieing them when they usually don't, and I didn't have the official approval. I knew it would pass. We'd done all our internal tests. We'd had it pre-approved, but it hadn't had that official logo. And so we had some controversy originally where people were like, this is just illegal. Like, you're not going to be able to use it. It'll never pass because of all the things that go on. And so it did. So that was great. And now people are legally using them. And yeah, I think it's got a performance aspect to it, with a racket frame. And to create these things, you have to double thermoform them. So the Aero² is double thermoformed, which is quite unique in the industry. And you have to do that because you have to build the individual frame first, and then the second stage.
Yeah, Johnny. So let's rewind. So tell us. I guess I get the question I think everyone's going to ask right now is like, what is the difference between, before we get into your paddle and the design, what's the difference between a paddle and a racket?
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, it's just the construction. So a paddle, for the most part, it's cut out of the core. Some companies doing something slightly different, like Gearbox, but most of them are cutting it out of a polypropylene core of some description. They're cutting out the shape of the paddle. Now the uniform bodies, the shape goes all the way into the handle. Stick a couple of bits of wood, and then there used to be just the face material, the 3K or the unibodied or raw carbon fiber. It's just stuck on, glued together under pressure. They were kind of Gen 1s. The Gen 2s, the thermoforming that started this year, that's kind of the same process. You cut out the shape, you put on the face materials, and then you stick it into a mold and you thermoform it. It's a bit more, it can be edgeless, a bit more power, a bit more high end. But that's paddle technology. It's kind of how paddles are constructed. Rackets are slightly different in that basically they start with this internal frame, just like a tennis racket. So underneath this, if you take the face material off and our core out, it's just going to look like a tennis racket with no strings. So the frame goes all the way. It's a unibody frame that comes all the way down, and that's the first thermoforming process. It's a blow molded fluid carbon process, and it basically creates that frame all in one go. And then what happens is we then fuse the internal core, and then we put on the face materials, and then we thermoform it a second time. And so what that really does is it means that the Aero² performs more and feels more like a tennis racket. So when you hit it, it feels like it's got strings, even though it doesn't. A lot of the tennis pros that play with it say it's more like a Wilson with a 45 string tension. And the reason you can get that is because you do have a natural flex off the face, because the core and the face materials are flexing around the frame. And with paddles, you just don't get that because it's all one piece by the nature. Like, in order to get that racket feel, you have to have that racket frame. And so fundamentally, that's what changes the difference between the paddles and the rackets. And the reason I think the industry is going to start moving over to rackets is you're just able to create tennis angles. You're able to hit it harder with more aggressive topspin. There's a lot more dwell time. The feel is very, very different. So you start playing more like mini tennis on the pickleball field rather than the typical way that people play. And I think you're starting to see that anyway. A lot more passing shots, a lot more cross court shots, a lot more power coming into the game. And the rackets just help that, basically.
Yeah, and can I reference that was the first time it's ever been called a pickleball field on the podcast? It was that was the first one.
I know
you might be the last.
It's horrible, isn't it? That's the Britishness coming across, and just bringing in the British terminology. I should say court. I'll be cremated for that, I know.
And to the point you made earlier, every sport, court sports, field sports. I mean, if you look at any sport, whether it's racquetball, squash, tennis, pickleball, American football, Johnny, or soccer, which some people call football, it doesn't matter what sport it is. They're all speeding up. The athletes are getting better. The technology is getting better. And to your point, like if you look at pickleball over the last 5 years, it has sped up significantly. And I don't have the statistics to back that up, but I think it's just an eye test where you can see that speed of the game is becoming more important. The players are able to hit the ball harder. So, and then also you see more tennis players coming in and just more players in general. So if they're going to bring in the best athletes. If there's 38 million people playing, there's going to be a lot of really, really good athletes. So that it's just the level of play is just going to be increased. The level of ball speed is going to be increased. The athletes are going to increase. The reaction time is going to decrease. And why not put something like that in your hand, an Om paddle that's going to bring that, it's going to bring that evolution of the game right into your hand.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, it's good for pickleball, right? The more players, the bigger the pool, the faster it tends to get. Usually speaking, in sports, faster is better. Typically, like to your point, eventually there's a plateau. Technology has a really big ramp up, and I think we're in the middle of that with pickleball, which is exciting. There's new stuff coming out every year, and then eventually it plateaus off. You get to sort of a happy medium where you've got the best, you get 90% of the way there, and everything else is just iteration. But it's definitely happening in pickleball. You've obviously, like you said, you got the tennis players coming in. They have a different game. Definitely from what we're seeing, putting Aero1 rackets into tennis players' hands is allowing them to play tennis basically on a small court.
That's what I was going to ask is so the majority of people that are playing pickleball are former or current tennis players. Why is Om a good choice for them? Or is it, are they going to feel a more familiar transition into the game by playing with an Om paddle? Or talk to us through that. Is that the best choice for a former tennis player?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be very biased, aren't I? Because, but I think it would be, I can't really say yes, everyone should use it. It's personal preference. What we're finding though is that a lot of the racket sports, the tennis players, the racquetball, even the paddle players that are coming in from Europe, it's an easier transition because, going from a racket sport like tennis and then playing with a paddle is quite a jarring position. They don't swing the same way. They're slightly weighted differently. It's more of a push type motion, whereas rackets are more of a snap swing with the wrist. And I think if you make that transition from these racket sports to pickleball, then yeah, the Arm Aero1's a good starting place. And we've noticed a lot of our tennis players talk to their tennis buddies, and they hear it's a racket, which is the start. It's got that internal racket frame, and then when they feel it, it's a lot more akin to what they're used to playing with on a smaller stage. So they don't have to transition as well. They can just, as a couple of our tennis guys do, they can just trust it more. Like they trust a tennis racket. Now they're trusting the Arm Aero1. Obviously, it's not exactly the same because it's different weighting, different size.
Sure.
But it's close. And, at Arm, we're trying to get as close to the tennis racket feel as we can, and we'll keep iterating, making improvements. The next iterations that we've got are even closer, and that's going to kind of be our position, And even for the people that don't come from tennis, it's a different way of playing. We got a lot of people that just prefer the racket feel to a paddle feel, and there'll always be people that want to play with paddles. Probably be a large majority, and there's great companies out there doing great paddles. Just at Arm, we don't think the paddle's the future. We think it's faster, more tennis angles, more tennis play style with the pickleball edge on it, and we think rackets is going to be the future. Now that's our play. We could be wrong, but that's what we're putting our money on. And
Sure.
some of the players that play agree, so that's good.
Well, let's talk about your racket then. I had to catch myself before I said the P word, but
Sure.
let's talk about it. Let me talk to us about the specs, because I know when we looked at the racket at first, it appears to be one way. Like, it appears to be very heavy. It appears to swing like a tennis racket, but the way you've built it isn't really heavy. It looks like it is, but it isn't, and it's powerful. Talk us through the specs for those people that like to hear. How much does it weigh? What kind of face does it have? What kind of core does it have? Talk us through the specifications of your racket.
Yeah, so the main thing is it's double thermoformed, which is pretty new, and that gives us a lot of ability to bring in the tolerances. Our tolerances are very tight. The static weight is 8.1, but we have a tolerance of, I use English metrics, it's 230 grams plus or minus 5 grams. That's 8.1 ounces plus or minus a fraction of an ounce. I don't like ounces. But basically, 92% of our production models are coming in at exactly 8.1 or 230 grams plus or minus 1 or 2 grams. So really, really tight tolerances because of the double thermoformed. And that 8.1 static weight puts it right in the mid-weight category. However, because of the way it's formed and it's a frame, and because we have that aerofoil, which makes up, the fluid carbon frame, and the aerofoil is part of our AeroTech, which is the core to Arm, then the actual swing weight is very, very low. So for an 8.1, you usually have a typical swing weight, and that's how heavy it feels when you play, of closer to 130. But ours comes in at 109. Now, 109, anything below 110 is very, very quick hand speed. And typically that's more associated with paddles that have a 7.5, 7.6, 7.7 weight. So even though you have that solid feel, and Uncrate and others have called us the Porsche pickleball because it feels very different to a paddle. It feels like it's very, very well formed. And, unless you John McEnroe this thing, it's probably not going to break. And I realize I've probably dated myself with that little quip, but
Everybody knows that one, and you're in good hands if you're dating yourself. That's our customer, so you're good.
Perfect. So these things are virtually indestructible. Not completely indestructible if you do happen to be John McEnroe, but that and the way that they're structured, the way that you're able to swing them, it's very, very fast through the air, and obviously that creates a lot more power as well. You get that natural legal trampoline effect. You get a very fast hand speed with an 8.1 ounce static weight, and force times acceleration is the power. So that's where you get that power. You're able to snap it through the air, which gets you that aggressive topspin that tennis players like, and that drives the ball. So not only can you hit it harder, you're actually able to hit it harder because you're going to create that topspin. And then on top, we do multiple layers of 3K carbon fiber. We do a unibody wrap, so it's around the entire thing. That second thermoforming process allows us to do that because we have the individual frame. We then fuse the Hexiom core to the inside of the frame. So you start with the frame, we fuse the core to the inside, and then the whole thing's thermoformed again. So that gives a lot of ability to do quite a few things in the manufacturing that you can't do if you're only thermoforming at once or gluing it together. And fundamentally and then obviously with the core, people always ask us about the core because when I was making these things initially, we used a standard PP core, but it kept fracturing because the double thermoforming process makes it quite brittle. So we had to kind of modify our polymer. So we have a modified polymer core, which we called Hexiom, and it just really gives us that really nice racket string style feel. And if you've ever hit with an Arm Aero1, you'll know it feels very, very different to anything that's on the market. And again, it's mainly because of the racket construction. It gives us a bit like when you build a Tesla, they were able to do a whole bunch of things that you can't do on a standard car because of the way that the battery weighted everything. We have the same thing with the Arm Aero 1. We're just able to do things that other manufacturers can't, which gives us a bit of an advantage, at least right now.
Sure. And what's coming down? We know the Aero² is out now and available and ready to rock. Tell us what's coming down the pipeline without upsetting the missus at home, who I know she might have. I don't know if she has. She's watching, but don't tell secrets that are going to get you in trouble. But if you have anything that's
try not to do that, she will
if
shoot
anything
me.
coming down the pipeline that we can expect from in the near future.
Yeah, so at the moment, we've got the Om Aero² out. Trying to keep hold of those is a little bit of a challenge, which is great for us. They're selling out quicker than we can produce them, which is wonderful. But what we have found is a lot of the 4.0 players want the elongated shape. It's super popular now. We're working on that at the moment. So the Aero² Pro is coming out, which is exactly the same, except it's going to be an elongated version. So anyone that's a 4.0 player or above, or just likes that extra extended reach and has a bit more accuracy in the middle, is probably going to want to move over to that. It's going to be probably 6 months or more. And then we have a lot of experiments. We're always testing the cores. We've got a whole bunch of tests that I won't say much about future ones for end of 2024, maybe 2025. Again, with the goal of just trying to create more and more of a racket type experience. But right now, the Om Aero²'s the one that's out there. It seems to be getting picked up quite well by people. They seem to like what we've done. I'm really appreciative of that. As a designer and an entrepreneur, we are massively neurotic. Like, we just want people to like us. And sometimes when people do come back and say, oh, we like what you're doing, it's it shouldn't matter as much to us, but it absolutely does.
No, I think that's kind of the whole MO of our sport, though, is like we're kind of, I mean, this is going to sound super cheesy, but like we're kind of a family. So if the player knows that you've put your heart and soul into it and you truly care about not only the product, but the sport, the company, I think that goes a long way, especially as pickleball continues to grow. But I still feel like we're in kind of that like still family mode where tennis grew so huge that that's a sport and it's a business. And now we're a sport and a business, but we still kind of have that, like, we're like Nashville, not like a major city.
I mean,
but we still have a lot of good things going on.
I mean, that's part of the reason. This is the most fun I've ever had building, because I've built products for a lot of my career, 20 years or so, for a lot of people like the United Nations, the British government, and it's a very different feel when you build products for them. Pickleball has been the most fun. The community, I still get, my team passes me on emails that people send through of just like book length reports on how things play, what they would do differently, what we should do. Some of them are borderline insane. Some of them are technically or engineeringly just impossible. Some of them are actually pretty darn good. And I always get back to them and say, hey, we're going to experiment with some of that. And I'm relentlessly out on the courts rather than the field, just kind of talking to people and asking them, well, what do you think? Like, and my two favorite things is like, okay, well, what do you think? Obviously, like, what's the best part? But the best real question that I ask people is, what's the worst part? Like, if I push you, what would you change? Especially the tennis pros. I'm like, if you were going to do it yourself, what's the one thing you would change? And I try and get that from everybody. And then what we do is we then take that back to the labs, and we try and figure out how we can make it better from there.
I mean, that to me is the recipe for success, right? You guys know what you're doing. You ask your players, the people that are kind of boots on the ground, what they need. And I think this, for the first ever pickleball racket, you guys have done so many good things. And I think you guys have a good vision, a fantastic product. We're excited to be a part of the launch, and we're expecting good, high things from you, Jonny. Not only you, but the product itself. So we appreciate your time today. We loved hearing about the racket. I think it was probably one of the most fun podcasts we've done, just because the educational portion of it, because it's the first ever. So appreciate your time today. Good luck with everything, and we'll be watching for the future.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.